Hello, listener. The fact you hear this means you're alive. If you're new here, consider subscribing and comment below where you're listening from. Let's begin the story. If you're reading this, we either got far enough away that the noise couldn't follow, or someone found the place we thought nobody would notice. I'm writing because my head keeps replaying the same stretch of hallway sound, and I need the order of it to stay straight. That Friday night is when our building stopped being a home and became a trap. And it happened fast. Takeout containers were still on the counter. Juniper and Knox had been half asleep on the rug until the first heavy thud hit somewhere below us. I was off the couch before the echo died. Both dogs lifted their heads, but I was already at the door, hand on the deadbolt, listening. Maya stood by the entryway holding the harnesses, looking at me with wide eyes, waiting for a cue. I didn't look back. I just pointed at the go bags near the closet and said, "Get them ready." She moved instantly because she knew that tone meant I wasn't asking. A second thud came, heavier. Then a door slammed hard enough to shake the pictures on our wall. My phone buzzed on the table with the building group chat, a stream of panic about elevators and water. Maya reached for it, her hands shaking slightly. I said, "Leave it, turn it off." She hesitated for a split second, then did it. We didn't need the noise. We needed to hear what was coming up the stairs. Footsteps hit the stairwell landing, uneven and frantic, followed by the metallic screech of a fire door yanked open. Knox gave a low, rumbling growl. I turned to Maya and put a finger to my lips, sharp. "Quiet the dogs," I whispered. "Now." She dropped to her knees, pulling Juniper close and clipping the leashes, her face pale. I pressed my eye to the peephole. The corridor was dim, lit only by a flickering emergency strobe. A shadow crossed the far end fast, then another, stumbling. A fist hammered on a door down the hall. A woman yelled, "Open up!" And someone yelled back, "Get away!" Followed by a wet, hacking cough. Maya started to step up behind me, maybe to look, but I put a hand back to stop her. "Don't," I said. "You don't want to see this." She stopped, trusting me, and stayed low with the animals. Down the hall, a man screamed, "He bit him!" And then the scream cut off like a switch had been flipped. I turned to Maya. "Muzzles," I said. "Put them on, I don't care if they hate it." She pulled the mesh muzzles from the bag. Her hands were fumbling, nerves getting to her. I watched her for a second, then said, "Breathe, Maya, just get it done." She nodded, swallowed hard, and got the clip secured. I turned back to the door. I didn't need the news to tell me what was happening. Riot, outbreak, collapse. It didn't matter what you called it. The only thing that mattered was that the hallway was a kill zone. A knock hit our door, hard and practiced. A man's voice followed, controlled but too calm. "This is building security. Open up so we can check on you." Maya looked up at me from the floor, terrified. She started to stand, maybe to answer, but I cut her off with a glare. I leaned close to the wood, my hand tight on the lock, and called back, "We're fine. Keep moving." The man outside didn't leave. He knocked again, louder. "We need everyone to contribute to the supply pool," he said. I recognized the tone. That wasn't security. That was a warlord in the making. A second voice whispered something outside, then laughed. A short, wrong sound. Knox growled again, feeling the threat. I looked at Maya. She was frozen, waiting for me to tell her we had a chance. I moved away from the door, grabbed my pack, and looked at the balcony. "We're not staying," I said, my voice flat and final. "Grab the dogs. We're going out the back." She looked at the sliding glass door, then at me, and nodded. She didn't ask how. She just followed. That's where this starts. With me realizing the door wouldn't hold forever and Maya trusting me enough to jump into the dark. The apartment is the part people never believe later because it looked normal on purpose, and that camouflage was entirely by design. Downtown high-rise living is glass, buzzers, and shared hallways, and while Maya saw a view, I saw a system I didn't control. Civil engineering trains you to look for failure points, and a 40-story building is just a vertical trap waiting for the power to die. Elevators, water pumps, HVAC, all of it works until it doesn't. And when it fails, You're just one more person in a box with too many locked doors. Maya didn't get it at first. She called it being intense, but I called it risk mitigation. One evening, months before that Friday night, I brought home 3 cases of canned soup and tuna. I lined them up on the counter and started marking expiration dates with a black marker. Maya walked in, saw the wall of cans, and gave me a look that was half amused and half worried. She asked, "Are we expecting a siege I don't know about?" I didn't stop writing. I just looked at her and said, "We don't talk about this outside, not in the elevator, not with neighbors. If things go bad, this stays invisible." She paused, hearing the edge in my voice, and simply said, "Okay, if it helps you sleep." Nothing I bought was weird, but the volume was specific. Rice, beans, pasta, oats, canned fish, things that lasted. I treated it like inventory, not a hobby. My side of it was the boring failure math. In a high-rise, water pressure is everything because without it, toilets don't flush and taps cough air. I didn't wait for permission. I bought flat water jugs and slid them under our bed where nobody saw them, and I stacked cases of bottles behind the winter coats. Maya watched me wrestling a 50-gallon drum into the closet and asked, "Do we really need that much water taking up space?" I stood up, wiped my hands, and said, "Clean water is the one thing you never regret having too much of. If the pumps die, you'll thank me for this." She didn't argue after that. She just let me handle the logistics because she trusted I saw angles she didn't. Power and heat were trickier. I knew loud gear like generators would draw attention, and attention gets you killed in a blackout. So I kept the backup small and tactical. Headlamps, spare batteries, a heavy-duty battery bank, and a hand-crank radio. Heat was the final piece. I bought a small indoor-safe propane heater and a carbon monoxide alarm and hid them in the utility cabinet. The first time I decided to test the setup, a storm had rolled in, wind rattling the balcony door, and I decided we needed a drill. I didn't ask. I just started moving. I filled the bathtub to the rim, laid out the filters, checked the batteries, and pulled out the heater. Maya came out of the bedroom, saw the living room turned into a disaster response center, and stopped cold. She crossed her arms and said, "Liam, you're scaring the dogs. Do we really have to do this right now?" I stood up, holding the heater, and looked her in the eye. I said, "Practice doesn't work if you only do it when you're comfortable. I need to know you can light this if I'm not here." She looked at the gear, then at me, and she saw I wasn't playing around. She didn't scold me. She stepped forward and said, "Okay, show me how it works." I walked her through it. Connect the valve, check the seal, strike the spark. When the pilot light caught blue and steady, I saw her relax a fraction. I pressed the test button on the carbon monoxide alarm until it chirped and told her, "If this goes off, we kill the gas immediately. No debate." We drained the tub an hour later. Supplies went back out of sight. Boxes were broken down inside so neighbors wouldn't see bulk packaging in the trash room. We kept our heads down. Maya handled the social side, smiling in the elevator, talking about the weather, while I handled the security. The difference between us and everyone else was that I had already accepted the math. A city runs on trust, and trust evaporates the second people get hungry. I made sure we were ready for that moment, and Maya just had to trust that I was right. The knock didn't stop. It came in steady, arrogant bursts, like the person on the other side expected the door to open simply because they demanded it. I moved instantly, stepping between Maya and the entryway, and pointed toward the living room. "Get back," I whispered, sharp and low. Maya hesitated, holding the leashes with white knuckles, the dogs vibrating with tension against her legs. The mesh muzzles kept their breathing quiet, but I could see the panic in Juniper's eyes. I motioned again, sharper this time. "Take them back. Keep them quiet." She nodded, swallowed hard, and pulled the dogs deeper into the apartment, ceding the tactical space to me. Even after I muted the building chat on my own phone, the preview bubbles kept sliding down the screen, a digital feed of absolute collapse. Someone wrote, "Water pressure just dropped to 0. Does anyone have extra bottles?" And the next reply came back sharp and immediate. "Stop hoarding and share what you have." Another message popped up, caps lock on, saying, "Elevator is dead. My mom can't do stairs." And a stranger answered, "Not my problem. Stay inside." Maya glanced at the screen from where she stood, her eyes widening as she read the desperation. I reached over, took the phone from the table, and turned it face down. "Don't look at it," I told her. "Watching them unravel isn't going to help us make the right call." Outside our door, the man tried a softer voice, shifting tactics from demand to persuasion. He said, "We're just checking on everyone, folks. Open up for a second." And then added, "It's safer for the whole floor if we know who's inside." That last line made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Safer for who? Safer how? I knew that talking back turns into negotiating, and negotiating is just admitting you have something to lose, so I stayed silent, pressing my eye to the peephole. Farther down the hall, something scraped heavy against the wall like a chair being dragged over tile, followed by the scramble of quick feet and a muffled, wet cry. The emergency light at the far end flickered, buzzed, and steadied again in a sickly yellow hue. Through the lens, the corridor looked wrong, not like a place where neighbors lived, but like a transient space people pass through when they've run out of options. Maya whispered from the shadows, "Liam, what is it?" I didn't turn around. I just held up a hand to keep her steady and said, "Nothing good? Stay put." The plan in my head was hardening. Stay sealed, stay quiet, and wait for the moment the building stopped acting like a residence and started acting like a trap. The first public alert that night was a blunt block of text on my screen about civil incidents and aggressive behavior reported near downtown hospitals. It told people to shelter in place and await instructions. I read it and knew immediately what it meant. Shelter in place is code for "we can't come get you." The radio band wasn't any better. One station played dead air, just a hollow hum. Another looped a calm, pre-recorded message, but the signal kept dipping into static fuzz. The dogs tracked the change in the atmosphere before we did. Knox stopped his low growling and started listening, head tilted toward the ceiling, and Juniper kept checking Maya's face for cues. Maya looked at me, waiting for orders. "Is it the riots?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head. "It's worse," I said. "Just keep the dogs ready." The group chat went from needy to hostile fast. Someone posted a shaky video clip from the lobby, a crowd shouting around the mailboxes and a guy waving his arms like he was running a town hall meeting. People started typing his name like it meant safety. Ellis, the property manager. A woman wrote, "Ellis says we're locking down the perimeter and everyone must contribute supplies to the central pool." I scoffed quietly. "He's building a kingdom," I muttered to myself. That's when I realized the timeline had accelerated. The engineer part of my brain wanted to believe a system holds as long as someone is managing the variables. But the survivalist part knew better. I told myself Ellis would try to keep order, maybe set up a shared pantry, but looking at the chaos on the screen, I knew that was a fantasy. Maya watched me, waiting for my assessment. "They're going to come for food," I told her, keeping my voice flat. "People don't become better when they're scared, Maya. They become hungry." I checked the deadbolt latch again, testing the metal. The hallway sound changed from sporadic movement to a constant churn. Doors opened and shut in quick succession. People called out names, someone sobbed openly, and then glass broke on a lower floor. A direct message came through from a neighbor we barely knew, a guy on our floor who always spoke too loud. He typed, "Hey man, I know you guys are in there. You got any bottled water? My girlfriend is freaking out." I stared at the screen. The polite neighbor in me wanted to answer, but I knew the tactical reality. I looked at Maya and said, "If I answer, he knows we're home. We go dark." No reply went out. We stayed still with the lights dimmed and the curtains drawn tight. Packs were by the door, shoes were on, double knotted because I made sure we were ready to move. Sometime after midnight, the elevator chimed once and stopped dead. A woman yelled in the stairwell, "They turned it off!" Another voice answered, "Stay inside, shut up." Then the knock came back to our door, closer this time. and the voice outside dropped the security act and tried for warmth. He said, "Listen, we're just making sure everyone is okay in here." The kind of forced friendliness that's meant to lubricate compliance. Maya started to lean forward, maybe to ask who it was, but I grabbed her arm gently. "Don't," I whispered. "He's fishing." I looked through the peephole again. Two figures showed in the warped glass. One stood square to the door like he owned the threshold. The other drifted behind him, head tilted at an odd angle, breathing a little too hard, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. I focused on the second figure. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his movements were jerky, uncoordinated. "The guy in the back," I whispered to Maya without looking away. "He's sick, not just flu sick. He's infected." The man closest to the door raised his voice. "We're collecting contributions for the community kitchen. Open up and we'll be quick." I didn't open the door. I didn't even unlock it. I put my mouth close to the crack and spoke with absolute authority. "We don't have anything to spare. Keep moving." He didn't get angry. He got patient, which was worse. He said, "Everyone has to do their part, friend." I watched the sick one wipe his mouth again, and under the flickering emergency light I saw a dark smear streak across his pale skin. Black blood. That was the confirmation I needed. I turned to Maya, my face hard. "We're not opening this door for anyone," I said. "Get the dogs to the living room. We're leaving tonight." The decision wasn't a debate anymore. It was a command. The building didn't collapse all at once. It tightened first, constricting like a giant lung trying to hold its breath, and then it started choosing sides. From our floor, I could hear the lobby acoustics funneling up through the central stairwell. A low, agitated crowd noise with Ellis's voice punching through the murmur every few seconds. He was loud on a normal Tuesday, the kind of property manager who treated the mailroom like his personal stage. But that night he sounded like a man who'd finally been handed a valid reason to tell people what to do. I stood near the door with my ear pressed against the wood, listening to the shift in tone. Maya was behind me in the hallway, keeping Juniper and Knox pressed against her legs, looking at me for an interpretation. I turned to her and said, "He's organizing." "That's not a safety meeting, Maya. That's a recruitment drive." A message hit the group chat with a shaky, flashlit photo. The lobby furniture dragged into a rough barricade. A couple of guys in heavy work boots standing with Ellis, and one of them holding a scoped hunting rifle across his chest like it was a badge of office. Maya saw it over my shoulder and gasped softly. I took the phone from her hand and locked the screen. "Don't look at it," I said, my voice firm. "It's just fear looking for a leader. We aren't joining them." The hallway stayed active for the next hour, doors opening and closing, urgent whispers, running footsteps, and then long, heavy pauses where nobody moved and everyone just listened. I kept checking the peephole in short, disciplined looks, never staring for too long to avoid casting a shadow. Maya paced a small circle in the living room, her hand drifting to the leash clips on her belt. She asked, "If they start doing rounds, will they skip us?" I looked at her and didn't sugarcoat it. "No," I said. "They'll come here. And when they do, you stay behind me. Do not let them see the dogs and do not let them see the packs." Not long after that, the heavy fire door down the hall slammed open and a neighbor's voice rose in a panicked rush. The words weren't clear, just a high-pitched plea, then a sharp, angry answer from a man, followed by a wet thud like someone had been shoved hard against the drywall. Knox's body went rigid, a low vibration starting in his chest. I snapped my fingers at him, a sharp command. "Quiet," I ordered. He settled instantly. Ellis's rounds started with noise to announce his authority. Boots on tile, the jangle of master keys, a heavy knock, then the same speech repeated door after door. It wasn't, "Are you okay?" It was, "We're securing the building, and everyone contributes, and we're keeping records." The part about records was what made it predatory, because records mean deaths. When they finally reached our door, the knock was firm but not frantic, the knock of someone who believes they have the law on their side. I signaled Maya to move back into the kitchen shadow. "Stay out of sight," I whispered. "Let me handle this." Ellis spoke first, close enough that the peephole showed the synthetic fabric of his jacket. He said we needed to come down to the lobby meeting for a head count. I didn't unlock the door immediately. I waited a beat, establishing that I was moving on my time, not his. Then I unlocked the deadbolt but kept the heavy chain lock engaged, opening the door only 3 inches. I put my face in the gap, blocking any view of the apartment. "We're not coming down, Ellis," I said, keeping my voice flat and bored. "We're fine in here." Ellis didn't like that. He kept his tone polite, but the words sharpened into threats. He said the building was a community now, that supplies had to be pooled so families with kids weren't left without food. It was a good story, a useful lever to pry open doors. A maintenance guy with him shifted his weight, and the rifle strap creaked leather on metal. But I was looking at the second man, the sweaty one I'd seen earlier. He leaned too close to the doorframe, sniffing at the crack like he was hunting. He looked at me, his pupils blown wide, and said, "We can smell cooking, man." Then he laughed, a twitchy, breathless sound. I stared him down until he looked away. He wasn't just sick. He was feral. The practical part of my brain knew exactly what this was. This was a shakedown. Maya was silent behind me, trusting my lead. I knew if I sent them away with nothing, they'd come back harder. I needed to buy us an exit window. "Wait," I said. I closed the door, engaged the bolt, and walked to the pantry. I grabbed 2 cans of vegetable soup, cheap, heavy, convincing. Maya watched me, eyes wide. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Paying the toll," I said. I went back, opened the door on the chain again, and shoved the cans through the gap into Ellis's chest. "That's what we have," I told him. "Don't knock again." Ellis took the cans, looking past my shoulder, trying to see inside. "We'll be back for the next round," he said. I slammed the door and locked it loud. As their footsteps moved away, I turned to Maya. "Get the bags," I said. "We're leaving, now." 10 minutes later, a scream went up from 2 floors down. Not a shout, but a primal tearing scream, followed by a pounding run up the stairwell that didn't sound like one person, but like a stampede. The power flickered, the overhead lights dimmed to brown, and for a second, the whole apartment looked like a grayscale photo. In that half-dark, the dog's eyes reflected back at us. A heavy crash came from below, then another. Somewhere down the corridor, metal scraped like a pry bar on a latch. I grabbed the rope bag and looked at Maya. She was frozen, staring at the door. I stepped into her line of sight and grabbed her shoulder hard. "Maya, look at me," I said. She blinked, focusing. "No hero stuff," I told her, my voice cutting through the noise. "We don't help anyone. We don't stop. We go over the rail and we move. Do you understand?" She nodded, fear turning into focus under my grip. "I understand," she said. The building had picked its new rules. I was just making sure we survived them. That scraping sound in the hallway brought back the visceral memory of the first time my shovel hit a tree root and stopped cold, because it's the same lesson in 2 different places. The surface isn't the hard part. The hard part is what happens after the surface gives way. A high-rise is just shared systems stacked on top of each other, and when the people inside decide the social contract doesn't apply anymore, your front door is just a thin panel of wood at best. I saw this coming way before the hallway went dark. Late fall had been getting louder in the city. More sirens, more shouting on the street at 3 a.m. And I decided we needed an exit strategy that wasn't trapped in an elevator shaft. Maya was reading on the couch one night, oblivious to the noise, and I stood over her and said, "We need a second option. This place is a cage if things go wrong." She looked up, surprised by my tone, and asked, "What kind of option?" I laid out the map on the coffee table. "A dugout," I said. 1 hour out. Farther than that and fuel becomes a gamble. Closer than that and we're still inside the panic ring. I've already picked the sector. We didn't need deep wilderness, which is a myth for amateurs. We needed a patch of woods that people ignored because it sat between boring suburbs and flat farmland. I'd been there once for a survey job and remembered the topography. We scouted it on a late summer Saturday. I made us dress like day hikers, light packs, water bottles, nothing that screamed construction project. Maya eyed the dense brush and complained about ticks trying to keep the mood light. I didn't laugh. I pointed to the ground and said, "Watch your step, don't leave a trail." I led her to a low rise above a shallow creek line. It was the perfect defensive geography. The slope was just enough to shed rain, and I kicked the dirt with my boot, exposing the soil. "Clay," I told her, "I'm firm, not swampy. And see that creek? If it floods, we're 20 feet above the wash line. This is the spot." Maya looked around at the empty woods and asked, "Are you sure we can build this without getting caught?" I looked at her and said, "We can if we do exactly what I say." The trade-off I had to manage was the wind. A dry rise stays dry because it's a little exposed, and in winter that means colder gusts. I told Maya this wasn't going to be a weekend hobby, it was going to be 18 months of hard labor. We built it the only way I knew how, strategically. Tools went in wrapped to silence the metal. I pre-cut all the structural boards at home so we weren't running loud saws in the quiet woods. Digging was the nightmare. Roots fought every swing, and Maya got tired fast, but I kept the pace. The dirt was the tactical problem. I explained it to her while I sweated in the trench. "We can't just pile this up. Fresh dirt is a beacon." I made her help me haul the spoil onto tarps into buckets, and then we walked it hundreds of yards away to scatter it under leaf litter in thin layers. It was brutal work. Maya wanted to stop early one afternoon, wiping dirt from her face, but I shook my head. "We don't stop until the trace is gone," I said. "If we leave a pile, we might as well put up a neon sign." Water control was where my engineering background took over. I dug a shallow French drain around the perimeter and filled it with gravel, explaining to Maya that without it, the hole would become a wet coffin in the first storm. The roof was the critical structure. Heavy beams, crossboards, a tough waterproof membrane, then soil back on top so it looked like nothing but forest floor. Maya watched me level a beam, checking it 3 times. She said, "It looks straight, Liam. You can relax." I didn't look up. "I don't relax on structural integrity," I said. "If this roof collapses, it buries us. I'm not building a grave." Ventilation was the only place where I almost missed a variable. I ran 2 PVC pipes to the surface, screened and hidden. During our first overnight test, Maya found a crushed plastic water bottle near the intake pipe the next morning. She held it up, looking worried. "Someone was here," she said. I took the bottle, examined the crush pattern, and cursed under my breath. "I put the vent too close to that deer track," I admitted. "My mistake, I'll fix it." I didn't complain, I just did the work. I rerouted the vent farther downslope, disguised the outlet under a rotting log, and added a charcoal filter system I designed to cut the scent of cooking. I capped the old opening and buried it. The fireplace came last. I built it small and hot, stone and clay, with a chimney that vented away from the entrance. I made Maya listen to the safety briefing. "This carbon monoxide alarm stays on," I told her, pointing a finger at the device. "If it chirps, you wake me up instantly. You don't guess. You wake me." The first test burn was tiny. When the smoke pulled clean and vanished into the trees, I finally sat back on the bench, wiping soot from my hands. Maya looked around the finished space, the dim lantern light reflecting on the treated wood walls. She looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "I didn't think you could actually do it. It feels safe." I nodded, checking the vent draft one last time. "It is safe," I said, "because I built it to be." We built the dugout to be boring, dry, and invisible, and on the night Ellis started knocking on doors, my obsession with detail was the only thing standing between us and the end. When the hallway finally broke, it wasn't the yelling that signaled the end, it was the impact, a hard, percussive slam that traveled through our front door and vibrated into the floorboards like a battering ram. I didn't hesitate. I turned to Maya, who was standing frozen by the kitchen island, and barked, "Balcony, now!" She flinched but moved immediately, grabbing the dog's harnesses. I stayed by the door for 1 second longer, watching the wood frame groan as another body threw itself against the outside. A man yelled for help in the corridor, and then his voice turned into a wet, gurgling scream that cut off abruptly. That was my signal. I grabbed the go bags and sprinted to the sliding glass door. "Get them outside," I told Maya, sliding the door open and pushing her through. "Don't stop to look back." The front door took a massive hit behind me, the deadbolt shuddering in the frame. Knox surged toward the noise, hackles raised, ready to fight. I grabbed his harness handle and yanked him back hard. "No!" I snarled at him, "and you move when I say move." I stepped onto the balcony and slid the glass door shut, locking it to buy us a few more seconds of visual cover. Maya was holding the dogs against the railing, her hands shaking. I didn't have time to comfort her. I dropped the rope bag, pulled out the climbing line, and clipped a heavy steel locking carabiner around the railing bar. I threw a munter hitch into the rope, a friction knot I knew would hold the weight without burning my hands to the bone. "Packs first," I ordered. I clipped the bags, lowered them fast, and watched them hit the alley floor. Then I turned to Maya. "Knox is next. He's heavy. You need to go down first to catch him so he doesn't bolt." She looked at the drop, terrified. "Liam, I can't." I grabbed her shoulder, forcing her to look at me. "You can," I said, my voice hard and absolute. "Go over the rail. Rappel down. Secure the landing zone. Do it." She nodded, swallowed her fear, and swung her leg over. I controlled her descent, watching until her boots hit the concrete. "I'm down!" she hissed from the alley. Now it was just me and the dogs. I grabbed Knox. He was 80 pounds of muscle and panic twisting in my grip. I clipped the rope to his heavy-duty harness and muscled him over the rail. He scrabbled at the air, dead weight, but the friction hitch took the load. I lowered him hand over hand, ignoring the burn in my shoulders until I saw Maya grab his harness below. Juniper was easier, lighter. When she was down, I looked back at the apartment. The front door splintered open with a crash. I saw a shadow spill into our living room, something moving fast and low. I didn't wait to identify it. I swung over the rail, wrapping the rope around my leg for a break, and dropped. My feet hit the wet concrete of the alley hard. I pulled the rope down, stuffed it half-assed into the bag, and grabbed the lead from Maya. "On me," I said. "Heads down, move fast." The alley was slick with trash and wet concrete. Maya tried to look behind us, but I pulled her forward. "Don't look back," I commanded. "Eyes on the exit." We moved toward the street, glass crunching under our boots. A figure stood under a streetlight at the mouth of the alley, shoulders slumped forward. As we got closer, the wind shifted, carrying a smell that hit me like a physical blow. Copper blood and sour sickness. The figure turned. It was a man, but his eyes were blown wide, black holes in a pale face, and his mouth was a ruin of dark fluid. He took a step toward us, his arms stiff. Maya gasped and froze. I didn't. I shoved her behind me, putting my body between her and the threat. "Back!" I yelled at the thing, my voice booming in the narrow space. It hesitated, confused by the aggression. I didn't give it a second chance. I grabbed Maya's arm and yanked her sideways around a dumpster. "Run," I said. We sprinted for the car, leaving the thing hissing in the dark behind us. At the car, the driver's window was cracked, but the door held. I fumbled the keys for a split second, adrenaline making my fingers stupid, then hit the unlock. "Dogs in the back, you in the front," I ordered. Maya shoved the dogs in and scrambled into the passenger seat. I slammed my door, locked it instantly, and turned the key. The engine caught. I didn't turn on the headlights. The dashboard glow was enough. "We're rolling," I said. We moved out, avoiding the main avenue where cars were piling into a gridlock of metal and fire. A man ran out from the sidewalk, waving his arms, looking desperate. Maya's hand flew to the door handle. "Liam, stop! He needs help!" she cried out. I didn't even tap the brake. I accelerated. "No," I said, my voice cold. "We don't know what he has. We are not stopping." She looked at me, shocked, but she pulled her hand back. I watched the man scream silently in the rearview mirror as we left him behind. The drive to the outskirts was a blur of tactical decisions. Every intersection was a potential ambush. At a red light, a woman with blood on her shirt slammed her hands against Maya's window, screaming to be let in. Maya flinched away, curling into her seat. I floored the gas, swerving around the woman, forcing myself not to think about the thud of the side mirror clipping her arm. "Keep your eyes forward," I told Maya. "Don't look at them." By the time we hit the outer ring road, the city was a burning smudge in the mirror. The silence in the car was heavy. Maya hadn't spoken in miles. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, scanning for roadblocks. "If we get boxed in," I said, breaking the silence, "we bail on foot. We head for the woods. You follow me no matter what, understand?" She looked at me, her face pale in the dash light, and nodded. "I follow you," she whispered. That was the deal. I was the driver, she was the passenger, and we were leaving the world behind. The farther we got from downtown, the more the city stopped behaving like a grid and started behaving like a series of failing valves. Streets that should have been open arteries were choked by abandoned vehicles, and every forced detour pushed us into darker, tighter blocks where nobody looked sure if they were running away from danger or sprinting right toward it. I drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the gear stick, knuckles white, treating the sedan like a tank. Maya sat rigid in the passenger seat, one hand hooked backward over the headrest to anchor the dogs. When Knox started whining, a high-pitched vibration of anxiety, I didn't look away from the road. "Keep him quiet, Maya," I ordered, my voice low and tight. "If we have to bail, I need them silent." She nodded immediately, leaning back to rub Knox's chest, whispering instructions to him, translating my command into comfort. I scanned the mirrors constantly. The radio was useless, a graveyard of static and looping emergency messages that offered no intel, so I reached over and flipped it off. "We don't need the noise," I said. "Eyes up, watch the sidewalks." Near the highway interchange, traffic thinned out, not because things were improving, but because people had run out of fuel or willpower. A line of dead cars sat angled across an entrance ramp with doors hanging open like broken wings. As we slowed to navigate the gap, headlights swept across a figure stumbling between the wrecks. It was a man, pale and shivering, with something dark smeared from his chin down to his collar. Maya gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Liam, look at him," she whispered. "Is he hurt?" I slowed the car just enough to assess the threat. The man looked up, his eyes blown wide and empty, and hissed at the light. "He's not hurt," I said, accelerating past him. "He's infected. Don't look at him." Further up, a woman stepped off a curb, waving both arms, looking healthy enough to be dangerous and desperate enough to be lethal. She screamed for us to stop. Maya's instinct kicked in, her body turning toward the window. "She's alone. Maybe we can—" I cut her off instantly. "No!" I snapped. "We aren't stopping. Not for anyone. If we stop once, we get swarmed." I saw Maya flinch at my tone, but she settled back into her seat, accepting the hard rule I'd just set. The next few miles were a grim exercise in evasion. Intersections were lawless. Storefront glass punched out to jagged frames, and small groups of people moved in the shadows carrying improvised weapons. A couple of times someone shouted at us from a corner, screaming for a ride, and each time I kept the doors locked and the speed steady, refusing to make eye contact. I could feel Maya looking at me, waiting for me to crack, but I kept my face like stone. By the time we hit the outer ring road, the sky above the skyline had that bruised, dirty orange glow you get from uncontrolled fires. Maya finally spoke again, her voice small. "Where are we going to park? The main lot will be full." I shook my head. "We're not going to the lot," I told her. "We're driving to the drop-off point I scouted last year. Trust me, I know the route." Just then, a shape detached itself from the median, a man moving with a wrong, jerky gait, stepping directly into our lane. I didn't swerve. I honked once, a long blast. He didn't flinch. "Hold on," I warned Maya. I jerked the wheel at the last second, missing him by inches. Maya let out a breath she'd been holding. "Okay," she said. "I trust you. Just get us there." Fuel was a ticking clock in the back of my mind. The needle doesn't care about panic. Stopping at a station was out of the question. Fighting a mob for gas was a suicide mission. The plan I'd made months ago was one tank, no stops, and I was sticking to it. When the last strip of suburbs finally fell behind us, the roads got narrower, and the ambient noise dropped. No constant sirens, just the hum of our engine. At the turnoff we'd memorized, a sheet of plywood leaned into the lane with jagged spray paint that read, "Turn around." Maya saw it and gripped the dashboard. "Liam, someone's watching the road," she said, panic rising in her voice. "We can't go through." I slowed the car, reading the terrain. "It's a choke point," I analyzed. "They want us to stop so they can ambush." I shifted gears. "We're not stopping, we're going around." I steered the car onto the shoulder, bumping over the grass to bypass the sign and the potential kill zone behind it. Maya watched the trees, terrified, but I kept us moving. "Good call," she whispered, seeing the logic. The pavement turned to gravel, then to rutted dirt, and branches started clawing at the side mirrors. We were close. I stopped the car for a second. "Kill the lights," I told Maya. She looked at me, confused. "Everything?" she asked. "It's pitch black out there." I looked her in the eye. "Light is a target," I said. "I know this road, I can drive it. Turn off the dash lights." She did as I asked, trembling. I killed the headlights. The world vanished into absolute darkness, save for the faint gray of starlight. I let the car creep forward, feeling the ruts through the steering wheel, driving by memory and touch. Maya held her breath, gripping the handle, trusting me blindly. "Here," I said finally, braking at the bend where the mud got deep. We sat in the dark, listening to the silence of the woods. It felt huge and heavy. "We made it," I told her. "Now the real work starts. Packs on, I lead, you follow." She nodded in the dark. "Ready?" she said. She was scared, but she was following my lead, and that was the only way we were going to survive the night. The walk into the woods was quiet enough that every small sound felt significant, and the rhythm of our boots pulled up one specific memory that kept looping in my head. The first night we ever stayed in the dugout, back when it was still just a construction project and I was testing its structural viability. We had driven out after work on a Friday with the dogs in the back seat and a cooler full of supplies. The air was humid, heavy with late summer, and I noticed Maya looking nervously at the dense brush as we unloaded the truck. She swatted at her neck and complained, "The ticks are going to be a nightmare out here." I didn't sympathize. I handed her a bottle of industrial-strength permethrin spray from my pack and said, "Treat your boots and your pants now. Ticks aren't a nuisance, Maya, they're a vector for disease. We don't get sick because we were lazy." She looked at me, surprised by the harshness in my tone. But she took the bottle and did exactly as I ordered. I led the way, machete in hand, clearing a path but keeping the cuts low so they wouldn't be obvious to a casual observer. "Stay in my footprints," I instructed. "Don't step on dry branches. Noise discipline starts now." Finding the hatch was the first test I gave her. The cover was camouflaged under layers of glued leaf litter and branches, indistinguishable from the forest floor unless you knew the exact triangulation. I stood back, crossed my arms, and pointed at the general area. "Find it," I said. She looked around confused, poking at the ground with her boot. "Liam, it all looks the same," she said, frustration rising. "That's the point," I told her. "Now keep looking, feel for the density change." It took her 5 minutes, but when she finally kicked the edge of the treated wood frame, she looked up at me with a mix of relief and realization. "It really is invisible," she whispered. I stepped forward, cleared the debris, and guided her hand to the hidden flush latch. "Feel that?" I asked, pressing her fingers into the cold metal. "That's the release. Memorize the texture. You might have to find this in the pitch dark with freezing hands." I unlocked it, heaved the heavy cover up, and hit her with the smell of the interior. Fresh treated pine, damp earth, and the cold stillness of underground air. "I go first," I said. "You hand me the dogs. Do not come down until I say the space is clear." The fireplace was the system I trusted least because fire in a confined space is a physics problem that ends in death if you get the airflow variables wrong. I knelt by the stone hearth I'd built, arranging a handful of dry twigs with surgical precision. Maya sat on the edge of the bunk, hugging her knees, watching me work. "Is it safe?" she asked, looking at the low ceiling. "Where does the smoke go?" It feels like a coffin in here. I didn't look up. I just pointed to the concealed flue pipe running along the wall. It goes where I force it to go, I said. But we need a failsafe. I reached up to the ceiling beam and pressed the test button on the carbon monoxide alarm until it shrieked, a piercing sound that bounced off the wooden walls. Maya flinched violently, covering her ears. "Jesus, Liam, warn me next time," she snapped. I turned to her, my face dead serious, holding the silence until she looked at me. "Listen to me," I said, my voice hard and commanding. "If this thing chirps, you don't ask questions. You don't try to find the source. You wake me up instantly and we evacuate. No shoes, no packing, we leave. Do you understand?" She stared at me, seeing the intensity, and nodded slowly. "I understand," she said softly. That night, the ventilation system worked, but the thermodynamics taught us a harsh lesson. The air intake pulled a heavy draft of cold night air across the floor to feed the fire. When the flames died down to coals, the room temperature plummeted and the air got heavy and stale. I was watching the draft gauge, but I heard Maya sigh and rub her temples. "My head hurts," she mumbled, pulling the wool blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It's freezing in here, Liam. Can we close the vent a little?" I stood up immediately, checking the O2 levels in my head. "No," I said, my tone brooking no argument. "Headache means the CO2 is rising. The draw isn't strong enough." I walked over to the intake pipe and cranked the valve wide open. A rush of freezing air flooded the dugout, dropping the temperature another 10 degrees. Maya shivered, looking miserable. "Liam, please," she said, "I'm cold." I sat down next to her, not to hug her, but to instruct her. "Heat is a luxury," I told her. "Oxygen is survival. We trade warmth for air, Maya. That's the rule. Fresh air first, warm air second. If you're cold, you put on a jacket. If you stifle the air, you don't wake up. Never ask me to close the vent again." She looked at me, shivering, but she saw the logic in my eyes. "Okay," she whispered, "you know best." We wrote our first standing orders that night. I didn't ask for her input. I took a legal pad and wrote down the SOPs, standard operating procedures, while she fed the dogs. Keep batteries with the lantern. Keep kindling sealed in plastic. Keep boots by the hatch, toes pointing out. Check the drain output after rain. I tore the sheet off and pinned it to the wall with a knife. "Read these," I ordered. "Memorize them. If I'm not here or if I'm hurt, these rules are the only thing that keeps you alive." She stood up and read them over, tracing the words with her finger, her face pale in the lantern light. "It feels militaristic," she said quietly. "It is," I replied, banking the fire for the night. "This isn't a camping trip, Maya. It's a lifeboat, and lifeboats have captains." Walking in the dark now, with the burning city far behind us and the dogs pulling toward the familiar route, I was glad I had been hard on her back then. We weren't panicking now because I had drilled the panic out of us months ago. All she had to do was follow the plan I had written, and I would get us through this. We left the car where the deep rut started, and the moment the engine died, the woods took over the sound spectrum completely. The crunch of gravel turned to the soft, treacherous thud of leaf litter, and the city disappeared behind us like a heavy door shutting. Not with drama, just with distance. I took the lead immediately, adjusting my pack and signaling Maya to fall in behind me. "Stay close," I ordered, keeping my voice to a whisper that barely left my throat. "Step where I step. I don't want us leaving a trail a blind man could follow." Maya nodded, gripping the leashes with both hands, her face pale in the gloom. She let me set the pace, which I kept grueling but steady. Knox wanted to pull ahead, his nose working overtime on the damp air, but I reached back and snapped my fingers near his ear. He looked at me, saw the set of my jaw, and fell back into line. The route was etched into my brain from months of repetition, but doing it in the dark with adrenaline flooding my system was different. I navigated by landmarks I felt rather than saw: the split oak, the slick patch of granite, the dry creek bed. Every few minutes I stopped to listen, forcing Maya to freeze with me, checking our six to make sure the chaos hadn't followed us. Somewhere off to our left, Deep in the heavy brush, a dry branch snapped with a sound like a pistol crack. It was too heavy for a squirrel and too clumsy for a stalking predator. I stopped instantly, throwing my arm out to halt Maya. She gasped, starting to ask a question, but I hissed, "Quiet," and grabbed her jacket, pulling her down into a crouch behind a rhododendron bush. I unclipped the safety strap on the holster I kept in my pack, my hand hovering near the grip. We waited in the freezing silence for a long minute. The woods answered with nothing else, just the wind in the bare branches. Maya was shaking against my side. "What was it?" she breathed. "Deer," I said, though the weight of the sound bothered me. "Or something else. Doesn't matter. We move faster now." I pulled her up. The air had shifted colder, and I saw her breath puffing out in white clouds. "Pull your scarf up," I instructed. "Vapor trails reflect light. Cover your mouth." She obeyed instantly, burying her face in the fabric, looking at me with wide eyes that trusted I knew how to keep us invisible. Finding the hatch was the final test of my preparation. The camouflage I'd designed was effective, too effective in the dark. I had to drop to my knees and sweep the forest floor with my hands, feeling for the density change between natural earth and the buried frame. Maya stood guard over me, watching the trees, shivering. "Liam, are we lost?" she whispered, panic creeping in. "We're not lost," I said calmly, not looking up. "I know exactly where we are." My fingers brushed against the cold, treated wood edge under a layer of wet leaves. "Got it," I said. I cleared the debris, found the flush handle, and yanked the heavy cover up. It groaned on the hydraulic struts I'd installed, opening a black maw in the ground. The smell hit us. Damp earth, pine, and the stale stillness of enclosed air. I turned to Maya. "I go down first to clear the room," I told her. "You hold the dogs. Do not come down until I signal." I dropped down the ladder into the dark, clicked on my red lens tactical light, and swept the room. Empty, secure, dry. "Clear," I called up, "and send the dogs." The entry was a steep ladder, which made getting 80 pounds of dog down a logistical nightmare that required strength. "Lower Knox to me," I ordered Maya. "Grab his harness, bracing your legs against the frame. Don't let him slip." She struggled with his weight, grunting with effort, but I reached up and grabbed him by the chest plate, taking the load onto my shoulders and swinging him down to the floor. Juniper was easier. Once they were down, Maya climbed the ladder and I guided her boots to the rungs. I climbed back up one last time to pull the hatch shut. I engaged the internal locking bolts, and the heavy thud of the steel latch sliding home was the best sound I'd heard all night. It was the sound of a physical boundary between us and the collapse. "Don't unpack yet," I told Maya. "I need to check the life support." I moved through the dugout with a checklist in my head. I checked the intake vents first, clear. I checked the moisture seals on the ceiling, dry. I walked over to the carbon monoxide alarm and hit the test button, watching the green light blink. "System is green," I said. Maya was sitting on the floor with the dogs, looking exhausted. "Can we light a fire?" she asked, her teeth chattering. "I'm freezing." I shook my head. "No fire tonight," I said firmly. "We don't know who else is in these woods, and I'm not risking a smoke signature until I survey the area in daylight. We do a cold camp." She looked disappointed, but she didn't argue. She knew the logic. I pulled the heavy wool blankets from the bin and tossed one to her. "Wrap up," I said. "Eat a ration bar, drink some water, and try to sleep. I'll take the first watch." I sat by the door on the wooden bench, my back against the cold wall, listening to the wind howl through the external vents. Maya curled up with the dogs on the bunk, finally letting go of the tension because she knew I was watching. The dugout was cold, dark, and smelled of raw earth, but it was mine. I had built it, I had stocked it, and I had brought us here alive. I watched the shadows, my hand resting near the tool belt, waiting for the sun to rise so I could see what kind of world was left outside. The city was gone, but we were still here, exactly as I planned. A few nights after we shut the hatch for the first time, the dugout started to feel less like a hiding place and more like a tactical position, which is exactly how I needed to treat it to keep us alive. I kept the perimeter protocols tight and non-negotiable. Short patrols, never breaking visual contact with the entrance, and always maintaining a strict formation. I took point with the weapon and the heavy light. Maya stayed 2 paces behind with the dogs. I drilled the mantra into her. Movement is risk. We stabilize first, then we decide. That afternoon, the air smelled sharp and metallic, a signal that snow was incoming, and I noticed Knox's body language shift before Maya did. He was pulling hard toward the heavy brush line, his hackles raised in a way that screamed aggression, not curiosity. Maya struggled with the leash, her boots slipping on the leaves. "Liam, he's pulling too hard," she said, her voice strained. I turned instantly, stepping in to reinforce her. "Lock the leash," I ordered, reaching out to grab the webbing. "Don't let him track. If he bolts, he drags you." I was reaching for his collar when the sound crashed through the trees, too heavy for a squirrel, too clumsy for a stalking predator. Knox didn't wait for my command, he snapped. The force of 80 pounds of muscle hitting the end of the line yanked Maya forward, and the leash burned through her grip before I could close my hand around it. "Knox, no!" I bellowed, but he was gone, tearing into the rhododendrons with a ferocity I'd never seen. A yelp cut through the woods, high and sharp, followed by a sickening, wet thrashing sound. I didn't wait. I drew the pistol from my belt and moved toward the noise. "Stay back!" I shouted at Maya, putting my body between her and the brush. Knox burst back out, stumbling, but he wasn't alone. A buck followed him, antlers lowered, eyes rolling white, foam dripping from a slack jaw. It didn't run like prey, it charged like a machine. It slammed into the brush where we had just been standing, missing us only because I grabbed Maya and shoved her backward. The buck crashed away into the dark with a gait that was all stiff legs and spasms, a biological horror. I looked at Knox. He was wobbling and dark fluid was pumping from a tear in his neck. I grabbed his harness, ignoring his growl. "Inside!" I commanded. "Move, now!" Inside the dugout, I took control of the chaos. I locked the hatch bolts and pointed to the tarp we kept for gear cleaning. "Get him on the tarp," I told Maya. "Get your kit. I need a sit rep on that wound." Maya was shaking, her hands covered in his blood, tears starting to spill. "Liam, it's deep. He's losing too much," she stammered. I grabbed her shoulders hard enough to bruise and forced her to look at me. "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through her panic like a knife. "You are a vet. Be a vet right now. I need you to focus. Pack the wound." She blinked, took a jagged breath, and nodded. "Okay," she whispered. She went to work, pressing gauze into the jagged tear the antler had made. I held Knox's head, my grip iron tight to keep him from biting her. He wasn't looking at us. His eyes were darting around the room, pupils dilated to black saucers, seeing things that weren't there. "He's going into shock," Maya said, checking his gums. "He needs fluids." She reached for a syringe, but I watched Knox's reaction. He wasn't just in shock. He was vibrating. His muscles were twitching in rolling waves under his fur, and a thick white foam was gathering at the corners of his mouth. He snapped at the air, his jaws clicking shut inches from my hand. I looked at the clock. It had been less than 10 minutes. "Maya," I said, my voice low and grim. "Look at his eyes. Look at the foam." She looked up, desperate denial in her face. It's just the trauma," she tried to say. "It's a reaction." I shook my head. "No," I said. "It's the virus. It's burning through him. That buck was infected, and now he is." Knox tried to stand, scrabbling his claws against the wood, snarling a sound that had no recognition in it. He looked at Maya, his owner, his person, and he snapped at her face. I yanked his head back just in time. That was the moment the calculation finished in my head. We were in a sealed box with a biological weapon that was rapidly losing its mind. "He's turning, Maya," I said, stating the fact without emotion because one of us had to be the rock. "He's going to be fully aggressive in minutes. We can't keep him here." She started to sob, wrapping her arms around her chest. "We can't just... Liam, we can't." I looked at the dog, then at her. I knew what had to happen, and I knew she couldn't be the one to do it. That was my job. The protector's job isn't just fighting the bad guys, it's taking the weight of the terrible choices so the people you love don't have to. I'm not letting him hurt you, I said, and I'm not letting him suffer while his brain boils. I stood up and walked to the lockbox. I took out the suppressor I'd machined and threaded it onto the barrel. Maya looked at me, horrified realization dawning. "Liam," she whispered. I didn't let it become a debate. "Say goodbye, Maya, do it now." She pressed her forehead against Knox's flank for a second, sobbing, whispering, "I'm sorry, buddy." Then I pulled her away. "Stay here," I ordered. "Hold Juniper, cover her ears." I clipped the leash to Knox's harness and dragged him toward the ladder. He fought me, thrashing and biting, but I was stronger. I hauled him up and out into the cold twilight. I didn't take him far, just enough to be away from the hatch. I knelt beside him, keeping my weight on his shoulders so he couldn't turn on me. I didn't hesitate. I didn't cry. I placed the muzzle against the base of his skull and squeezed the trigger once. The sound was a dull thud, swallowed by the trees. I sat there for a moment in the silence, making sure it was done. Then I stood up, wiped my hands on the snow, and went back inside to tell my wife she was safe. I keep looking back at the timeline, analyzing the collapse to see if I missed any early warning signs, because in my line of work, missing a variable is what gets buildings condemned. From the outside, our life looked soft. 2 people in a glass tower, walking dogs and ordering takeout. But that softness was exactly why the crash hit everyone else so hard. They were dependent on a system that didn't care about them. I wasn't. Ellis is the variable I should have neutralized sooner. A month ago, I wrote him off as a petty tyrant with a clipboard, which was a tactical error on my part. The second fear disrupted the social order. He didn't try to protect the tenants. He tried to hoard them. Managing people in a locked ecosystem turns into owning them very quickly, and the moment I saw him standing in that lobby with armed backup, I knew the building had stopped being a shelter and had become a holding pen. I didn't wait for permission to leave. I saw the cage closing and I got my family out before the lock clicked. The dugout didn't save us because it was clever or high-tech. It saved us because I treated boring like a discipline. I drilled the protocols into Maya until they were muscle memory. Food stayed rationed, water stayed treated, fire stayed smokeless. Light discipline was absolute. Every choice I made was about minimizing our footprint and denying panic a foothold. There is a cost to that kind of decisiveness, though. Leaving early kept us alive, but it also meant I had to make the call to abandon the neighbors. Some were decent people, but most were liabilities, loud, unprepared, and desperate. I still hear that scream cutting off in the hallway, but I file it away as necessary collateral damage. You can't save everyone, and if you try, you lose the people you're actually responsible for. Maya is still processing the trauma. She checks the vent flow too often. She wipes the table when it's already clean. When she mentions Knox, she doesn't cry anymore, but I see the shadow in her eyes. I don't let her dwell on it. I tell her, "Kuto, we did what was necessary, and I carry the weight of that bullet so she doesn't have to. That's the deal. I take the violence. She keeps her humanity. If anyone finds this log, stop hoping for a rescue and start securing your own perimeter. Take the boring parts seriously. Stock calories you can actually eat cold. Keep water filtration redundant because the city taps are dry veins. Keep a way to monitor the radio frequencies so you know where the kill zones are. Most of all, stop waiting for official permission to save yourself. The authorities aren't coming. The first danger isn't the infected, it's the desperate neighbor who didn't prepare. We didn't leave because we felt brave. We left because I recognized that the hallway stopped sounding human, and I made the executive decision to cut our losses before sentimentality got us killed. Juniper is the reason the mornings still have shape. She gets up, stretches, and looks to me for the routine, so I give it to her. A perimeter check, a hydration break, and a secure patrol. It sounds small, but small routines keep the mind from sliding into chaos. Sometimes, right before dawn, a faint mechanical sound carries through the trees. Maybe a military convoy on the distant highway. Maybe scavengers. When that happens, Maya freezes, her hand gripping my arm. I don't flinch. I put a hand on her shoulder, check the door bolts, and say, "Not today." I hold the line so she can breathe. The hatch is sealed again tonight. The wind is moving through the canopy, masking our noise. The world above us is broken, but down here, under the timber and earth I laid with my own hands, we are still standing. I will keep the watch. I will make the hard calls, and we will survive because I won't accept any other outcome. If you enjoyed the story, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below where you're listening from. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.